Hello? Hello, hello? Hey everybody, TinyLeaf here with a couple of disclaimers. So, today's topic is Five Nights at Freddy's, or FNAF, as known by the fanbase. And because of how massive this series has become, I wanted to be upfront and say that this video is specifically going to focus on the games canon to the series, because those are the most relevant to the discussion. Furthermore, this video isn't going to be a lore video. It's more of an analysis of the storytelling techniques used by the series by someone who loves Five Nights at Freddy's and the conclusions that I came to. Remember, these are all just my own theories. Some video game theories, if you will, and I welcome all other ideas in the comment section down below. And to anybody going to the comment section to say that FNAF was never good and this video is a waste of time, thanks for the engagement. I can't wait to laugh at you over Discord with my friends. With all that out of the way, here are your trigger warnings. Enjoy the show, and good night.
I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but I have a very long history with the Five Nights at Freddy's series.
I joined the fandom in 2014 when the first game dropped, and I managed to stick with it up until 2017. But last December, it popped back onto my radar with the release of the newest game, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. And I was quite surprised to see how divided the fanbase was.
Old-time fans have been falling away from the series for the past few years, but Security Breach's reception was like anything I had seen before. I mean, it wasn't my personal favorite, but I didn't think Security Breach was that bad of a game.
You know what? Actually, since Freddy works, never mind.
There's no way she saw me going here now. No way.
He is very sneaky. You never know what Creeper Monty's doing.
Oh, what? What? Whoa.
Oh, there he is. Does he go faster the more you
Oh my god! What the f is this?
Okay, so maybe it was. Glitches aside, some people say that even if it ran perfectly, they still wouldn't have liked Security Breach because it didn't feel like a FNAF game to them. And I find that interesting.
Because when you have a series going on for as long as FNAF has, change is inevitable. So at what point did the series change so much that even dedicated fans have fallen away from the series?
I'm not content to write this off as Security Breach was bad, because that's the boring answer. Instead, I would rather start at the very beginning and work my way forward so that I can better understand how it is that we got from this to this.
I've got a long journey ahead of me, and I invite you all to come along for the ride. Grab a slice of your favorite pizza, because today, we're going to be talking about the evolution of Five Nights at Freddy's storytelling.
Let's take a moment to remind ourselves of FNAF's roots and start at the very first game.
Created by Scott Cawthon, Five Nights at Freddy's has you playing as Mike Schmidt, the newest nighttime security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Guided by a series of tapes left behind by the previous night guard, you have to monitor the security cameras and the restaurant's four main animatronics: Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy. Because of an apparent malfunction, they're all trying to break into your office to murder you, and you only have so much power to keep the doors locked. So you have to check the cameras, save your power, and try to survive all 5 nights.
Thanks to YouTube's algorithm at the time favoring scary game reaction content, FNAF did receive a whole lot of attention as the next big indie horror game phenomenon. So luck did play a role in its success. But I propose that there were 3 additional reasons that the original FNAF game got so many people's attention.
Number 1, gameplay.
FNAF is survival horror, a genre that traditionally relies on a lot of motion and making use of the physical space surrounding the player. Sometimes it's used to make them feel lost or otherwise exposed to surrounding threats. But it can also be used to help the player feel safe, such as providing a space for them to hide and figure out their next move, or even just giving them somewhere to run.
FNAF 1 subverts this by trapping the player in a single room and giving them minimal defenses. The only things keeping the player from being killed are a couple of locked doors, a security system, and a very tiny amount of electrical power. There is no running, there is no hiding, there is no planning. Just you desperately flicking between cameras and doors with the hope that you could survive the longest 7 minutes of your life. If you move a second too slow, or waste just a bit too much power, game over. This creates a heightened, frenzied concentration that keeps people engaged because they have to think quickly on their feet on how to best protect themselves from the 4 animatronics and makes them more susceptible to jump scares. Number 2. Atmosphere.
Cutesy things and monsters have always been used as objects of terror, but FNAF was one of the first games to really lead into children's entertainment as a horror device and to be effective with it.
Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria is clearly meant to be a parody of Chuck E. Cheese's, and it goes out of its way to twist that image into something so disgusting. Like, this place is one giant health code violation. It's run down and filthy. And the animatronics aren't looking too much better with their big, bulky bodies, unsettling dark eye rings, and grimy looking fur. It's also so dark and quiet, twisting an otherwise fun place into something so uninviting. I almost feel as though I've wandered into a liminal space, or that I'm trespassing somewhere.
Even nowadays, these original screenshots still set me a little bit on edge and make me uncomfortable. I think it really speaks to this game's staying power that it has effectively spawned its own subgenre of horror.
Number 3. Lore.
FNAF lore is notorious nowadays for how complex it's become. But in the earlier days, there were only a few breadcrumbs left behind that really hinted at the possibility of the story being something much bigger than a minimum wage worker simulator.
This starts on the very first night with the first recording left behind by your friend the phone guy. He explains that the animatronics were once allowed to roam around during the daytime, unlike now where they can only roam around at night.
But then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
It was just a tiny offhanded comment, and yet that was enough to start generating curiosity in the fanbase about what exactly the bite of 87 was. And from there, the rabbit hole only gets deeper.
You experience so many other oddities in the restaurant which often disappear and reappear at random, almost like you're hallucinating or dreaming. The most notable one being the newspapers reporting on the missing children's incident, where 5 children were lured into the back room of the restaurant, and how the animatronics soon began to develop a foul odor shortly thereafter. The game never drew our attention to these tidbits, and unless you were looking closely enough or got lucky, you probably missed some of these things on your first go-around. That kept people coming back and searching for more pieces of an incomplete puzzle.
So that's the first FNAF game in a nutshell. Although plenty of people still debate whether or not it was actually scary, the point is that it got popular. And these are a few reasons why I think it did. So as we go forward in the timeline, I invite you to keep a closer look at this list right here and start to pay attention to how these elements change as more entries are introduced to the series. The next few entries in the FNAF series followed quickly after the first. And I do mean quickly. FNAF 2 released 3 months after the original, FNAF 3 4 months after that, and FNAF 4 in another 4 months. For the sake of consistency, I will be referring to these 3 games and the original as the First Era of FNAF.
These 3 entries are similar in gameplay style, the biggest changes being in the number of animatronics you're fighting and the resources you're micromanaging. Setting-wise, however, we start jumping through the timeline. FNAF 2 is a prequel taking place in 1987, where you work at a new Freddy Fazbear restaurant. FNAF 3 happens during the modern era, well, 2015 modern era, at Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction based on the rumors surrounding the restaurant. And then FNAF 4 is set somewhere around 1983, where you play as a child being haunted by nightmarish animatronics in their bedroom.
Some people appreciated these changes in gameplay mechanics, others thought that they had become unnecessarily complicated. And the same divisiveness could also be applied to the redesigns of the animatronics. Some people thought they were either too cute or trying too hard to be creepy. Other people enjoyed them well enough, with special mention going in particular to the genuinely unnerving Springtrap. Still, on paper, gameplay and atmosphere stayed relatively the same across the first 4 entries.
But the most notable change was in the lore department, thanks to the introduction of the death minigames. For those unfamiliar, FNAF 2 had pixelated playable cutscenes that would occasionally trigger after a player's death, hence the nickname. These sequences would recount past events from different points of view, and usually focused on the animatronics.
It's here where we really start to see FNAF's lore become a focal part of its identity and its popularity. The first game offered its own fair share of secrets, but only so much theorizing could take place. We had one game, one time period, and no additional cutscenes to explore beyond that. But the second game encouraged us to start piecing together a timeline and gave us some of the most significant elements of the series.
FNAF 2 introduced us to the Purple Guy, a former Freddy Fazbear employee who was a serial killer who led to the missing children's incident and who would eventually become Springtrap. It also gave us the Puppet, who is perhaps the most intelligent animatronic in the series, and it introduced the possibility of there being other restaurants other than the two that we've worked at.
FNAF 3 and 4 wrapped the series up by giving us a beginning and an end, and when you organize the series like this, you get a relatively coherent story.
A child serial killer murders a group of kids at Freddy Fazbear restaurants, who are all brought back to life by a puppet and now possess the animatronics. The robots spend a few decades hunting down their murderer, and they are eventually freed after their killer is crushed to death in a mascot suit. But his mummified corpse persists long enough to make it to a haunted attraction site and antagonize the night guard there. Then the building burns down with him trapped inside, and everybody's soul is laid to rest. The end.
It sounds painfully straightforward when I summarize it like this, but these were all just scraps and pieces of information that took a lot of time and effort to parse together. And people loved it! Humans are storytelling creatures, and we like it when things make sense. So having all these jumbled up puzzle pieces just generated curiosity in the fanbase and kept us hooked, even if it was never spelled out clearly to us.
As a matter of fact, in a Steam post that has since been lost to the annals of time, Scott had even confirmed that the box at the end of FNAF 4 was meant to symbolize that we had been given all of the pieces and that the story was finally over. Were there still questions? Absolutely. But lots of people were content with the series ending with just a little bit of mystery still unsolved. Yet, as we all know now, FNAF 4 wasn't going to be the finale for very long.
Sister Location kickstarts what I will affectionately be referring to as the second era of FNAF games. This game was special in that it was the first mainline game released after FNAF World, which almost killed the series, and it was going to be the first FNAF game that was fully voiced. So bearing that in mind, what was Sister Location about?
You play as a late-night technician known as
Eggs Benedict.
who just started his job at Circus Baby's Pizza World. Every night, you're given a set of tasks to help maintain a new set of animatronics. Circus Baby, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora. And so you have to roam around the different areas of the facility, guided by the voice of your hand unit and Circus Baby, and accomplish your nightly chores so you can go home and watch TV. Sister Location started the trend of FNAF games moving further away from the single-room, fast-paced mechanics. Some of the different tasks you were assigned still had you relying on quick reflexes and fast thinking, but some required extreme patience and slow movement. And while you were given some different rooms to move about in, it still had you crawling through the vents like the pathetic worm we all are.
As some people felt that the original gameplay style was beginning to grow a little stale, the shakeup that Sister Location introduced was received well enough, except for that mini arena section. And there was something really refreshing about a FNAF game that gave the player room to move around an admittedly cool looking facility and have voice acting. Let's stick a pin in that last one there. We will be returning to it in a minute.
Even ignoring the gameplay, Sister Location is still a wild departure from the first era of FNAF games because of the atmosphere. The underground facility you're working in is more sterile and technical, and every animatronic is glossy and extremely articulated, as opposed to previous entries. And while Sister Location changed settings, it was still plenty f***ed up in its own special way. Why's that, you ask? Well,
Great. It looks like everything is as it should be in Funtime Auditorium.
oh, you think?
So even while gameplay and atmosphere were significantly different from their predecessors, they still shared quite a bit of similarity with previous FNAF games. But what about the lore? You can't have a FNAF game without the lore. We were told all the pieces of the story had already been given to us, and secrets were so essential to the game's identity that you couldn't just not have them. So, what now?
She can dance, she can sing, She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
William Afton is one of the co-creators of Fazbear Entertainment and has his own animatronic company known as Afton Robotics. But more horrifyingly, William Afton is nothing other than the real name of the Purple Guy. Now, this name had never been mentioned before in the game series, and a casual player may have no idea the significance of this reveal. The only way you would be able to appreciate it is if you were plugged into the fandom and had any familiarization with the book Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, which was published back in December 2015.
But TinyLeaf, I thought you said you were only going to cover the canon FNAF games in this video.
Yeah, I am. But The Silver Eyes was the first and only time that William Afton's name had been mentioned prior to the release of Sister Location. And according to Scott Cawthon, the book takes place in an alternate universe and serves as a vehicle to explore some aspects of the story not shown by the games. Ergo, the book's events are non-canon to the game's timeline, but they still share some characters between the two universes. And if that confuses you, welcome to the club.
The Purple Guy was obviously very important prior to Sister Location. But Sister Location, aside from this officially debunking the theory that Phone Guy was the Purple Guy, starts to shift the story to center more around William Afton and his family. We learn about Afton's daughter, who we hear speaking in between nights, and was the girl Circus Baby killed. Beating the Hardest custom night reveals that we've been playing as William Afton's son, Michael, in Sister Location and presumably every other mainline game. And then, of course, William Afton himself, the Purple Guy who got killed in the Springlock suit and died in FNAF 5. Psych!
Let's stick another pin in Mr. William Afton over here. Sister Location set a precedent for future games which won't become more noticeable until later into the timeline. Nonetheless, one thing is clear. Sister Location introduced a lot of significant changes to FNAF's storyline right before it introduced its second grand finale. Ain't that a sentence? Alright. Pizzeria Simulator.
You play as some schmuck who recently purchased your own Freddy Fazbear's restaurant with your life savings. Left with a measly $100 to your name, you've got to upgrade your pizzeria to the best of your abilities and avoid getting sued before the big party at the end of the week. During the daytime, you're in charge of running and decorating the restaurant to your heart's content. You buy different animatronics, games, and safety equipment to make it look nice. And the mini games you play to earn money are fairly low-stakes recreations of popular arcade games with a few hidden secrets inside. Once you're done, you head to a security office where you complete basic tasks on your computer and try to avoid getting killed by the animatronics crawling through the vents. So we're back to something more similar to the gameplay style of the First Era games, where you're trapped in one room and managing fan noise, your own temperature, and two separate vents beside you. After hours, a voice known as the Cassette Man gives you the chance to salvage old but familiar-looking animatronics found in the alleyway. Regardless if you succeed or not, they end up sneaking into your restaurant and making your life a living nightmare. There's a total of 6 different endings. In the first 5 endings, you get fired for going bankrupt, being too much of a safety liability, even by Freddy Fazbear standards, failing to meet your duties outlined in paragraph 4 of your contract, doing literally nothing, and finding out top secret information that gets you sent to an asylum. In the true ending, you get fired, literally, by the Cassette Man, who reveals this was all a ploy to free the souls trapped inside the animatronics and banish William Afton to heck. But you and him decide to go down with your ship and everybody is burned alive. And if you manage to do all the secret mini-games, you see a final shot of a graveyard with 5 headstones and a 6th peacefully watching over them all. The end. Again.
Have you ever thought about how the first finale happened, then Sister Location came around, undid everything, and added a whole bunch of new lore, only for the very next game to be the second grand finale and barely touch on anything introduced in Sister Location? I don't know, it's something that bothered me while I was researching this video, and I had to mention it. Pizzeria Simulator is weird to think about. Because in retrospect, you see the after effects of Sister Location's influence in here, but you also see the beginning of new trends that will start in Pizzeria Simulator and continue on into future games. The most significant one I want to highlight, though, is how it chooses to present new information to the player.
In Era 1 games, most additions made to the lore were conveyed either through short pieces of text or simple visuals. My guess is that part of it is stylistic choice, but also because those earlier games were back when Scott was working with less resources. They may not have been much to write home about, but they were able to convey the broad strokes well enough for the player's imagination to flesh out the rest. And the details were just ambiguous enough that it fed into the theory community's never-ending frenzy.
Voice acting became more of a mainstay feature starting with Sister Location. And because it doesn't occupy any physical space on the screen, it becomes much easier to convey story beats in a more explicit manner.
Before then, the only voices you ever got to hear were those of the phone guy and the phone dude at the start of the night. The voice recordings you got on night 1 usually were the longest, with the rest lasting only maybe a minute before you were plunged back into the game. In these two games, there was a lot more dialogue from a lot more characters.
Let's go ahead and take you down. We have come back to that pin. This isn't a criticism of the voice actors' performances, by the way. It's more of an observation regarding the script that they were given. Look at the cassette man's final words. Not only are there visuals going on with everything he's saying, it's also much more lengthy. It leaves less room open for interpretation or speculation and less room for theorizing. Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator are just more dramatic and direct when they're developing the plot.
But Pizzeria Simulator also presents a shift towards the game's tone being more comical. Not to say that the previous games couldn't be funny on occasion. Fun Guy has always been a nice bit of comic relief. But he was just that, comic relief amidst a plot where you're running on pure adrenaline and watching children get murdered. Pizzeria Simulator is a lot more colorful and bright, relatively speaking, to the previous games, and we get the sarcastic dialogue during these bright and colorful sections. So there's that lack of tonal dissonance that adds on to the atmosphere of something being wrong.
I hurt my finger. I say all of this while still having a lot of personal fondness for Pizzeria Simulator. And all things considered, I don't think this finale was half bad.
We had come a long way from the first game, and the final message was rather sweet. It was a short second era, but I was happy with it, and I could bow out of the fandom with no regrets. And then the series continued while I wasn't looking! Era 3, everybody!
FNAF VR Help Wanted was developed by Scott Cawthon in conjunction with Steel Wool Studios. Remember that name.
You play as an unnamed beta tester for the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience, a game created in-universe to do damage control after some lunatic, lawsuit pending, made his own game spreading malicious lies. Help Wanted serves as a port for some of the original games, and includes new minigames where you help maintain the various animatronics. It also received a Halloween DLC called Curse of the Dreadbear.
On paper, porting FNAF to VR is honestly pretty genius and seems like a logical next step. Even though the games were already first person, VR could only heighten the feeling of being trapped within a security office. So gameplay-wise and atmosphere-wise, not too bad. But then there's the issue of accessibility.
Help Wanted was the most expensive FNAF game at the time, especially if you wanted to buy the DLC. And a decent VR set isn't very cheap either. So that limits the number of people who would be able to try out the game, as not everyone would have the equipment necessary to play it, nor would want to make that investment. The alternative was to play the flat version of Help Wanted, which came out almost a whole year later. Yet that removed part of the original appeal of VR, and apparently it didn't work too well either.
Had Help Wanted only been a port of the first few games with a few extra bells and whistles, I don't think the accessibility issue would have been as significant as it is. But it's not just a port. It's also a continuation of the game's story.
As you explore through the different areas and minigames, you collect these different tapes from an in-universe developer of the game known as Tape Girl. She documents an ongoing struggle with some malicious code that had been introduced to the game files, and how it caused one of her co-workers, Jeremy, to go insane and left her to beta test the game herself. But she started seeing an ominous figure wandering around the game world, and soon, so do we. Meet Glitchtrap, an AI copy of William Afton himself.
Hey, wait, I thought he was dead.
We all did, but I guess he always comes back. Or at least that's what everybody tells me. I remember when that joke used to be funny.
William Afton's consciousness was somehow transferred into VR, and now he's trying to find a suitable host that will let him escape back into the flesh world. You manage to contain him in the good ending to prevent him from causing any more harm. Unfortunately, he manages to break free and exact some of his influence over another beta tester of the game, Vanessa, aka Vanny, as revealed in Curse of the Dreadbear and a couple of emails in the mobile game special delivery. The nature of Glitchtrap's influence over her is ambiguous at this time, but she seems to be able to communicate with him somehow. In donning her own costume, the implication is that she's continuing Afton's legacy and doing his bidding from beyond the grave. What for? At the time, we could not tell. However, promotional material for the then upcoming security breach implied that Vanessa was going to be the primary antagonist.
Undoing the happy ending of Pizzeria Simulator by revealing that there was a version of William Afton still out there causing problems and being a crusty old man was... well, it was a choice that I wouldn't have made. But people were hyped for a new antagonist after all this time, and I can't really blame them. Vanny's backstory is pretty unsettling. I was not a part of the FNAF fandom while this was all going on, and so I can only say this from an outsider's perspective. But this setup had a lot of promise, even if I think the game surrounding it was lackluster. It kept fans excited, and it kept them speculating with the series' biggest game on the horizon. What could go wrong? In 2021, it was leaked by a Twitter user that Scott Cawthon had made a donation to the former President Donald Trump's campaign back in 2020. If you've gotten this far in life without having heard too much about American politics, Trump's presidency was already very divisive at this point, and this wasn't helped at all by the fact that election season was taking place in, let's call them less than ideal circumstances. So Twitter did what it does best, and the backlash boiled over until Scott Cawthon officially announced his retirement from the series on June 16th, 2021. Although I certainly have my own opinions, politics is above my pay grade, and I don't want to debate politics here on YouTube.gov. But I still think it's relevant to talk about the ramifications that Scott's departure has on the series.
The separation of art from the artists is a constant debate in fandom culture. And separating Scott from the FNAF series may be especially difficult because his involvement with the community went beyond that of most creators. Aside from delivering frequent updates, he also dropped into live streams to reveal new pieces of lore, created games for charity events, made references to popular FNAF YouTubers in his games, and even financially supported fan game creators to update their series and license them. The FNAF series changed settings and styles and everything in between. Yet the one thing that never changed was Scott Cawthon's role as a creator and a member of the community. So seeing the controversy spark and spiral out of control felt a lot more personal than it might have been if his relationship with the fan base was more distant.
But the other part to consider is that because Scott was so connected to the community, he was much more in tune with what his fans liked and how to best cater to them. Now that he's no longer in creative control, the story now rests in the hands of Steelwool Studios, developers who don't have that same connection to the fans and lack that same understanding that Scott had.
So one way or another, Scott's departure left the community in a precarious place. Some fans packed their bags and said goodbye because they didn't feel comfortable supporting it, as is their right to do. And the others who chose to stick around now had to contend with the reality that the FNAF series would have to continue without Scott.
Steelwool Studios already had to deal with a Panda Express delaying their projects, and now they had to contend with a community that had been fractured apart by the choices of a creator. Security Breach had a lot riding on it. It could not afford to fail.
In Security Breach, you play as Gregory, a child who snuck into Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaplex and is on the run from one of the security guards. You team up with Glamrock Freddy to try and survive the night at the Pizzaplex without getting caught. A task easier said than done, since you're being hunted down by various animatronics, a bunch of staff bots, and a serial furry killer. A serial killer furry. A furry serial killer. Nailed it.
Simple enough. What did the fans say? It could have been better. Now, the most common complaints about Security Breach, as I'm sure many of you are aware of by now, is that it's poorly optimized and there are a lot of bugs associated with the game. And they're not wrong. But this whole video, I've been talking about how these changes have built over the past few years, and so let's return to the original 3 points that I had mentioned before on what made the first game so special, and see how Security Breach compares to it.
Number 1, gameplay.
The resource management and claustrophobia that the first games relied upon has been whittled away at since Sister Location. But Security Breach was the first game to have done away with that in its entirety.
The gameplay has now become more task-oriented and exploratory, where you're searching around a wide-open area for a certain key item to progress onto the next stage. And while that's certainly not a bad thing, it's also a gameplay style that's extremely common, and FNAF originally stood out for doing none of that. The obstacles this time are still wandering animatronics, but this time, you have to rely on stealth or use a weapon to outrun the monsters chasing you. In theory, also not a bad idea. But the staff bots don't pose much of a threat as you can sneak by them pretty easily, and they themselves don't directly result in a game over. And the main animatronics don't have unique strategies to differentiate them from one another until far later into the game.
That being said, there are still some other activities that break up the monotonous gameplay. For example, we have Monty's Gator Golf and Phaser Blast, that part where you're having to administer controlled shocks throughout the door systems, a couple of boss fights, whatever the is going on here, and Simon Says.
Number 2, atmosphere.
A large part of the creepy factor from the previous games is due to the fact that it feels so empty and unwelcoming, thanks to the dark, unclean atmosphere that you were constantly subjected to.
Sister Location was the first game to break from formula by giving you space to move around a small facility, but it kept everything cast in cold blue light and shadows. Pizzeria Simulator didn't let you move around as much, but still gave you dark settings, and same with Help Wanted.
Security Breach is interesting because it does have a large variety of settings, but they all feel a lot more inviting, and I think that's part of the problem here.
The fun and colorful settings of FNAF 1 and 2 were still clouded by darkened filters and filth, which made it dip into the uncanny valley. And while the colorful world of Pizzeria Simulator wasn't scary by itself, the settings still changed to something more appropriate when it was time to be scared. These settings helped ease you into, well, unease. Take a look at the pizza place. Even when the facility is closed, there's a pleasant use of warm colored lights, the spaces look clean, and there's always cheerful ambient music playing in the background. I think it's telling that some of the most universally accepted creepy parts of Security Breach are when you're being stalked in a dark, dirty place with minimal light, when you're trapped in a bathroom with something peering in at you, and when the animatronics are all beat up and mangled as they chase you. Not to say that this game doesn't look fantastic. The animation looks great, it's super fluid, and never before has a Freddy Fazbear restaurant been so appealing. Tonally, it's not very fitting for a horror game, but it's not bad by any means.
And the voice acting also works against the environment as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Once again, the voice actors are doing a great job, and some of their lines do well to enhance the story and the atmosphere.
But hearing the same voice lines repeated over and over can make them feel less threatening, even annoying to some players. Whereas before, all we got were gross, wheezy noises, static, and the occasional haunting music box. I don't know. I feel like the cheerful, vaguely cynical voice of the hand unit was more effective when it was in Sister Location and felt out of place compared to its surroundings. Number 3.
This is the first game where we have animatronics with unique personalities. Beforehand, they didn't matter too much as they were only there to really be murderous machines. Sister Location flirted a little bit with the idea of animatronics having unique personalities, but this really didn't impact too much because we usually only got to experience one animatronic a night.
But Security Breach's animatronics are given much more complexity than that and are a constant presence in this game. Roxanne seems to struggle with deep-seated insecurity while also being self-obsessed. Chica has the robotic equivalent of an eating disorder. Monty straight up murdered Bonnie and wants to become the next star of the show. Freddy is pretty much your dad throughout the entire game, gets generally distraught when he sees his friends behaving weirdly, and suggests that there is a way to save them.
And then nothing comes of it. Nothing comes of it. Aside from Freddy, pretty much everyone else operates as the same killer robots as all the other animatronics have been, despite being given some sort of apparent sentience. At least Sister Location had Baby directly manipulating you for her own benefit.
The human characters don't fare too much better. Gregory is the first voice protagonist we've had, and nothing about him ever gets very fleshed out. Not that we ever got to know much about previous protagonists. but giving him a voice sets him apart as he's no longer a silent, blank slate character. All we ever get to know about him is that he's afraid of Vanny, that he's somehow stuck inside the Pizzaplex and into Freddy, and the bad ending implies that he might have been homeless. Future games may give us more background on him, but it would have been helpful to have something more given to us to understand how he got dragged into all of this in the first place.
And Vanny. Poor Vanny. You deserve so much better than this queen. The past 2 years have been building Vanny up to be the next main antagonist and working as one of William Afton's proxies, only for her to be effectively sidelined in the game and only make a couple of appearances.
She was originally supposed to have a meter where if you stayed in one area for too long, she'd come swooping in after you, but that feature was too glitchy, so it had to be cut. Go figure. And the most lore we get from her is found in some secret tapes, which really only confirm that she's got a body count and has another personality that's a serial killer.
Nope, I'm not even going to touch that. I'm not going to touch that. I've already hit my hot topic quota for today. And then, of course, the multiple endings, if you could call them that.
Full disclosure, the only one I think I like is the bad ending where you just straight up escape and it's implied that Gregory got found by Vanny. If only because it was the first time I was hit with the realization, oh yeah, Vanny has murdered children before. She's the antagonist. This is actually kind of scary.
Oh wait, what's this about missing children? Yeah, they sort of sneak that in right at the very ending. There's no real build up to it, at least not from what I remember.
Not that it really matters, as in pretty much every other ending Gregory escapes, most often with Freddy, and Vanny usually winds up either dead or missing. And it was never our objective to figure out what was going on at the Pizzaplex. It was always just escaping. And even in the best ending, which isn't even the true ending, we just have ice cream with Vanny. With the exception of the bad ending where you actually do what your objective was the whole time, there's nothing really all that different between most of the endings and the true ending.
Except for one little thing. Are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me?
Okay, first time, I could get behind it. Sort of. 2 times, you're pushing your luck. But 3 times, where he doesn't even speak, apparently can control technology, and just gets dragged back by whatever the this thing is, I'm not sure if I'd be more insulted if he never appears again or if they try to pull this off a 4th time.
Seriously, I don't think that there is a single part of recent FNAF lore that pisses me off more than this. Plenty of people have already pointed out that this basically means that Michael and Henry died for nothing back in FNAF 6. And you know what? I'm not about to disagree with them.
Hey, TinyLeaf from the future here. I sort of forgot to mention that Cassette Man's real name is Henry Emily, and that his daughter was the kid who ended up inside the puppet. So, sorry for not mentioning it earlier. Then again, the Emilys were first brought up in the books and haven't been mentioned again since Pizzeria Simulator, so there's that. Alright, back to the rant.
But I'm mostly just sick and tired of William Afton being the main villain. He started off as being a serial child killer, and now we've reached this point where he's not only a master inventor, but somehow an AI and survived 3 f***ing fires. I know this game isn't meant to be realistic, but this is really pushing it.
And the longer you keep dragging this crusty old man along, the more you're going to be reminding people of the past and continuing to bog down a story that's gotten so convoluted that I gave myself a headache trying to research this video. And people are going to keep being salty about the series no longer being as good because the story refuses to move on past Peepaw Afton. And speaking of moving on, what a perfect segue.
As I've illustrated to y'all today, FNAF has been moving away from what made those original games so special for a very long time. It was never perfect, but it was distinct, and it had its own identity that made people fall in love with it.
The original game is almost 8 years old, and has undergone years worth of changes from the gameplay to the tone of the characters. And I believe that was a smart decision. People were getting bored of the same formula, and new changes were celebrated. But the series still insists on clinging to a story that started nearly a decade ago, and by all accounts should have already ended. Twice. Still, the FNAF series just keeps coming back. More games have continued to be made, and it means that this happy ending has to be undone just so we can resurrect this rotten rabbit and pretend like anything happening in this Pizzaplex bears any significant meaning on a story that used to be about 5 missing children.
Security breach by itself is not a bad idea, bugs and glitches aside. And if this was its own original IP, I could see it attracting a lot of fans based on its own merit.
But because this is a FNAF game, and because they keep reminding us of the past, we're always going to be comparing it to those original games. And it's always going to leave some people disappointed. Because this is what FNAF is now. It's goofy, it's colorful, it's weird, and it's less scary. It's a series of gradual changes that have been taking place over the years, and that's perfectly fine. Lots of people seem to like this new direction, and more power to you if you do.
But I opened up this video by saying that a lot of people didn't like Security Breach because it didn't feel like a FNAF game to them. And after combing through the entire series, I'm inclined to agree with them. And that makes me really sad to say. This is not the FNAF series that I and many others grew up with. And yet, it still insists that it is.
I wanted to like Security Breach. I really did. But I just can't bring myself to care about what's going on anymore. I wish nothing but the best for Steel Wool Studios and how they handle the future of FNAF. And I hope that whatever they deliver is something the fans can be happy with. However, I've come to accept that the future is one that I no longer wish to be a part of. Because I don't need another finale for a story that I feel is long over.
Thanks for watching, everybody. I know this video might have been a little bit more critical than some of you people were hoping, but I still love the FNAF series, even if it's no longer something that interests me, and it may be a while before I decide to tackle it again. But I can assure you that the next video topic I plan to cover is going to be a lot more lighthearted and hopefully a lot more positive. But until then, take care, brush your hair, and Zero Escape is calling my name. This is TinyLeaf, signing off.